My name is Florent. I'm working with the French Water Partnership. I'm a program officer there, and I'm working with Bram on the initiative 4.3 on the advocacy.
So my name is Bram. For those who don't know me, I'm WASH advisor at ACF, and so together with the French Water Partnership, we are co-leading Initiative 4.3 on advocacy. Today's agenda consists of a first section where we will have Leah from UNICEF, who will talk to us, or rather maybe remind us. Maybe for some it's a first introduction. I don't know, about what advocacy really is. So this is a great opportunity to have her. Thanks, Leah. Next, we will present a couple of the major findings of the report that was conducted by Global Health Visions. There's actually two reports, but we will focus on one. The report just came in today, by the way, the finalized version. So we will ask the Secretariat to disseminate the reports to all the roadmap members. Then we will introduce the process, and Lisa will do that, of the 2023 major conference that's upcoming and how the roadmap can engage with that conference. And we'll talk a little bit about next week's workshop as well, which is intended to prepare for that conference and how we will advocate. So this is it. We should finalize everything within 1 hour. So let's go. I will give the floor maybe to Leah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I think I haven't met most people, but I know Jamal. I just wanted to kind of give a really quick background on what we're talking about when we're talking about advocacy. And I think many of you will probably already know a lot of this, but it's a good reminder. So generally, we think of when we're talking about advocacy, we're talking about the deliberate process based on evidence to directly and indirectly influence decision makers and stakeholders and relevant audiences to support and implement the actions that contribute to our objectives. So I think in this case, it's going to be focused on policies and laws, but generally it can be any change that you want to see, how to influence the key players in that space to make this change happen. It's a process. It's not just one activity. It's usually centered around a larger strategy and theory of change. It's very often confused with fundraising, communication, public-based campaigns, but they're related to advocacy, but not quite the like fundamental part of it. So I think a lot of those things that I just mentioned are tactics that you can use to achieve your larger advocacy goal. Another way, it's often also confused with technical assistance to governments. Although advocacy is about influencing decision makers, and this is one way that can be done, it's just kind of one piece of the pie. And the same with communication in general and the public narrative. These are all little parts that contribute to a larger process of your advocacy strategy. So speaking of the strategy, the next slide is a breakdown of how you get there. So how you can kind of determine your theory of change. Generally, and I'm going to be using terms that we use at UNICEF, but hopefully they'll be understandable to many of you as well. We start with the problem statement or the context and problem analysis. So this is kind of the background on the issue, the political context, the impact on affected populations. It's kind of the landscape of where the situation is now and what the problem is that we're trying to address. When you have your problem statement outlined, that kind of informs the advocacy impact statement, which is the change that you want to see. So that would be the overall goal. An example would be if we want to secure, sustainable access to WASH for children dying from WASH-related diseases. That's something that we might use at UNICEF. And then from there, you kind of break it down and get a little bit more specific, determining what the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely elements of that goal are. So you would then shift that to something like Parliament approves an increase in the budget for WASH infrastructure as a percentage of GDP with a focus on these areas by this time frame. So it's kind of getting more into the nitty-gritty. And then once you've established your goals and your specific objectives, you can then determine who are the people who are going to help make that happen. So that's your stakeholders, all of the people who are actors in this space. Generally, an exercise that we would do in my team is just listing out who all of the people are that we know of that are already working in this area, including opponents, and then mapping them out to determine who has the highest level of power and who has the highest level of interest. So maybe you have a lot of people who have a lot of power, but they're not necessarily interested in the change that you want to see. Those could be key people that you would want to target with the information that you're sharing in terms of the objective you're trying to reach. And then there's also people who have a lot of interest, but they don't have very much power. So figuring out how you can ally yourself with them to determine the best ways to approach the people who do have power. So that's kind of the power mapping exercise. And then from there, once you determine the key targets and the people that you're going to ally yourself with, you have the milestone mapping. So that's determining what are the opportunities, the clear milestones in the time frame that you're working towards, where you can influence the people you're trying to influence. So I think for us, we've definitely identified the 2023 Water Conference, but there are many other opportunities leading up to that we would potentially want to engage. Some of them are public. I'm sure that some of them are private, behind the scenes conversations. And based on that, you would then determine what your tactics are. So that's kind of going back to what we were talking about in the first slide, which is communications efforts, media engagement, maybe lobbying and quiet diplomacy, public messaging, social media. There's many endless ways to engage with the audiences that we're trying to reach. With those tactics, once you've identified them, then you would need to figure out how to tailor the messaging to your audience that you're trying to reach. And oftentimes that'll be dictated by the person that you've identified as your target, but also the platforms that you're using to in those tactics. So media messaging would be different than maybe behind closed doors, quiet lobbying, which would be different than public messaging, or if you've identified maybe a group of people like parents as your audience, you need to tailor everything to fit those specific people. And then one final thing that I wanted to add in is that in my experience, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, there are so many different ways to go. Prioritization is like the number one key to having a really sharp and specific advocacy strategy. So determining where your organization or this group can make an impact, what your comparative advantage is, where the momentum already is, and where the resources are, can also help influence what direction you'll go in, because otherwise you can end up spreading yourself too thin. So those are kind of the main points I wanted to give on advocacy. I hope it wasn't too quick, and probably very familiar to many of you already. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. That was great. I think the next section is with you, Florent and Bram.
Yep. I will start by the introduction of the report, Global Health Vision, just finished. And just as a reminder, I will introduce quickly 4.3, which has an objective of developing an integrated approach to establish an inclusive wash sector advocacy strategy.
Sorry,
including
Florent,
market
can we
content.
go to the next slide? I don't know who is.
Hi,
The
sorry.
next slide, but it looks like it's not working. Let me restart it. There's been maybe a freeze on my side. Let's go back.
So yeah, so generally this initiative aims also at support all other initiatives. It has been designed with 4 phases, and GHB consultancy was set up for the 2 first stages, which is map and identify advocacy priorities at global and local levels, and compile advocacy initiatives and materials. And then we'll have the challenge to elaborate the advocacy strategy and roll out the advocacy packages. So the report has been done through, the report is called Elevating Humanitarian Wash Advocacy Global Landscaping. How it was done, it was with the desk review, multi-partner consultation and survey for 20 organizations, and key informant interviews were also part of it. And we would like to show two graphs that show a bit of the results of the consultation. And for the first one, it was a question regarding the financial and human resources capacities of the organization to conduct humanitarian wash advocacy. And as you can see, the main one was somewhat, and the other one was no. And why my organization does not conduct humanitarian wash activities or conduct some humanitarian wash advocacy activities. So you see that it's partially blur, and there is not much means to set up advocacy at organizational level. Then during this report, Elisa, we just had some key findings on the consultation. There was a few themes that our organization wanted to be discussed and be in part of the advocacy. So the emerging themes were like the nexus. So we know that the nexus is not something new, but participants said that the nexus should be part of the advocacy. Then improving the humanitarian wash coordination through Global Wash Cluster, for example, for the humanitarian wash. Yeah. Then also not a new theme, but something important appeared. It's the localization. And final theme is to discuss about climate change. Also, during the survey, we had few challenges that emerged from the participants that would say that insufficient collaboration between the WASH and development actors were considered, which is also crossed with the first emerging theme that the participants wanted us to discuss. Then it has been seen that there is no leaded organization for advocacy, which led to disjoint advocacy within the organization. And another theme is that the local level is chronically undersourced for advocacy, especially in fragile context. And on the ground, also, we've seen that competition between agencies and sectors undermines the cohesion. Another interesting point is that even though we would like to have advocacy strategy, there is a lack of evidence-based thing that could lead us to have a structured advocacy. Overall, the humanitarian wash leadership is perceived as really weak, that there is no major structure that led humanitarian wash. And there is a lack of confidence in the WASH program and its impact. Due to the context, chronicle never-ending wars and conflicts make also a deep sense of the urgency and the fatigue among the community.
Okay, I'll take over. Let's put it this way. It's not literally mentioned in the report, but my conclusion is we are a bunch of amateurs. I mean, a bunch of things are related to the challenges that Florent just described, but it's also about a lack of understanding of how to do good advocacy and how to find the niches. Can you go to the next slide, Elisa? So there's in the report a number of recommendations, a number of best practices, and some of that go a nice bunch of amateurs. Some of that go back to the basics, and the basics were just described by Leah. It's doing the good process for advocacy. Analyze the context, map the stakeholders, and do a power analysis. Understand who are the real decision makers, who makes the decisions, and then shape your messages accordingly. Target your audience and adapt your messages to your different targets. This is a first recommendation. A second basic recommendation is to collaborate. To collaborate because a joint advocacy, a message that is carried by a number of organizations, by definition has more impact than if it's a message that just carried by the French Water Partnership or by ICRC. And the messages we formulate, they need to be smart. A bunch of our advocacy messages are very high level. They are not specific, they're not measurable, and hence they're not actionable because they don't give anything concrete to a decision maker to say, hey, this is something that I want to do and that I can include in my policy. So formulate smart messages. Make sure your messages are informed by what's happening on the ground. It's very straightforward and easy, country level, and therefore also it's a lever for localization. Make sure that how our process to get to impactful advocacy messages is done together with local partners. We need to work on, and this is actually our next phase in the 4.3 initiative, the two next phases, we need to get to shaped or packaged messages, toolkits, tools that are easy to use by all of us. That includes probably tools to help visualize your messages, to use crisp language, and so on. And another one that I remember from the report is consistency. One of the key informants that is quoted in the report said, we need to deliver the same messages for years and years and years to come. We need to, stick with what we convey. Build a strong body of evidence. This is also what Florent said. We lack evidence also for other sectors, also for things like climate change. I mean, donors and decision makers, they want to know what is your potential impact. And what comes out of the report is, we are not sure about your impact. Another quote from one of the key informant interviews was, in the humanitarian wash sector, we are building things that don't last. So we need to improve on that. Tap into decision makers' personal aspirations. Yes, center the lived experience. So this is about conveying messages that probably work on a more emotional level. And then combine dissemination tactics, which again, we are a bunch of amateurs, but it's really about doing WhatsApps, doing the social media, doing face-to-face, doing the informal advocacy work on top of all of the gatherings and the global events. Next slide, please. What should we be advocating on? These are some of the key findings from the report. It's the report, it's Global Health Visions after their work found this. The first one is around, so the first major recommendation is focus on a couple of niches. So as a sector, humanitarian WASH, what are our niches? According to the report, the first niche is to focus on the continuity of WASH services in conflict settings, okay? This is not something new. There's several reports, there's a lot of work, there's the Water on the Fire series, there's the Joining Forces report, which was released recently by ICRC, the World Bank, and so on. But looking at the Water on the Series report, Global Health Vision said the actual advocacy demands aren't really clear. They're very high level, and they're not very actionable. Also, what's coming next? What's coming after the Water on the Fire series? So their recommendation is unpack this a bit, and why not focus on a tracking and a reporting mechanism for attacks on WASH infrastructure, like already exists for the health sector, and then next to establish a new coalition to collectively document and report attacks to the UN Security Council. This is something that could have an effect. Another niche is around the quality of humanitarian WASH services, and here the reflection is we should be advocating for the roadmap as such and develop a narrative, which is basically already there, about why we exist. We are the answer to a gap that has been identified in recent years. Following the report by MSF and so on, and the 2000, what was it, 2000, we always mix up the year, 2018 or something. Guillaume always knows this. Anyway, so this is about developing advocacy messaging around the roadmap, around its different initiatives, focusing on why we want to improve the quality of humanitarian WASH services and that we are committed to it. Then it's around working on the nexus. 3.5, if they're here, might be happy to hear this. But nexus not as nexus, but in a strategic way, if I understand it correctly, it's not necessarily using the word nexus, it's developing a narrative around resilient WASH services. And that, what they also said in the report is, yes, well, that's it. Let me go to the next one. So nexus and resilient WASH services, and then humanitarian WASH and climate change, and develop not just a narrative, but also an evidence base. Why is humanitarian WASH necessary? What is the link with climate change? Because the fragile settings are the ones, fragile countries and humanitarian countries where we work are the ones that are going to be the most affected by climate change in the first place. So. And then finally, launch campaigns and sharpen the profile of humanitarian WASH. I think this is it. Is there another slide? Ah, yes. Possible next steps. Final recommendations about how should we go about this? Not what are the niches, but what should we do? First recommendation is to identify a neutral convener. When Florent talked about challenges, one of the challenges was there's no natural humanitarian WASH advocacy leader. In the development WASH sector, there is. We have water aid. There's sanitation and water for all. In our sector, there's not a natural leadership. So the question then is, should we, instead of having a different initiative, 4.3, if we all recognize that advocacy is important for all of the initiatives, and I believe we do after the survey we did, should we have a neutral convener that is within the Secretariat? Could it be another consultancy to work on advocacy campaigns, for example, or should we consider having an advocacy officer, for example, within the Secretariat? A second recommendation is to create an advocacy working group within the roadmap, with all the roadmap members, or those interested at least. Because, as I said, there is definitely a link with a number of the other initiatives. Then align the 4.3 with the Global WASH Cluster Strategic Plan, which advocates for coordination for high quality WASH outcomes, and which mentions joint advocacy efforts for all sectors and clusters. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff in the Global WASH Cluster Strategic Plan that the roadmap could align with. This is a recommendation. And then finally, our initiative, at the start, it mentions a bunch of different levels: the global level, the regional level, the national level, the local level. So far, we haven't really succeeded. We haven't succeeded at all in bringing local voices within our group. To be honest, we're even struggling to get a sufficient number of roadmap members within the 4.3 initiative and to get things really off the ground. So to make things work, the idea is to develop advocacy on two different levels. First is a global level, and we'll get to that with 2023. And the second is to use national coordination platforms, but also our own national level programming as member of the roadmap and as a member of the Global WASH Cluster to carry out our messaging. I think in a nutshell, these are the recommendations of the report. As I said, it will be shared by the Secretariat. I really recommend all of you, if you're interested, to have a look at it, because it's a good one. Thanks, and over.
Thank you, Bram. I'm going to take over. The third part of the café is from the workshop we had previously on advocacy. There was a clear demand to do something for the UN 2023 water conference process. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time investigating that process because none of us really knew what was happening. And we thought everyone could be interested about how can we influence this. So the main event is going to be from the 22nd to the 24th of March 2023. And it's going to be happening in New York, and it's the government of Tajikistan and the Netherlands that are hosting it. But there's going to be hopefully all country delegation, UN country delegation, that should be making statements, hopefully table commitments. That's the hope, is that it's the midterm review for the decade for water. So there should be advancing commitments to accelerate efforts for the implementation of the SDGs. And there's going to be also the relevant non-governmental organizations that can be there as observers. There will be key preparatory events. These are the ones that we found. There might be many more, as Leah said. There's the public ones and there's the behind the door ones. So please feel free to share with us any information you may have, and we don't. But from what we know is that in February 2022, there was a consultation report. It's kind of disappeared from the line here, but it's closed now. And the final report is available. We can share the link, and I will make a small presentation just after this slide about what came out of it. But clearly, mainly, there's nothing about humanitarian wash, no spoiler. What's happening next is from the 6th to the 9th of June, there's going to be the Dushanbe water process. It's one of the key preparatory events for 2023. We wanted to be kind of ready to share messages for that event, but clearly that's just going to be too close and too ambitious. So we might not be able to share anything for this one. There are, for those of you that are not ECOSOC registered organizations already, there's the possibility to get a special accreditation for organizations and other stakeholders. Our question was that maybe, and we can ask the steering committee of the roadmap if they would like the roadmap to apply. Maybe the co-chair could be representatives. So that's one of the questions we will ask, but we do not know yet because we haven't looked at the process. If it's possible for a non-legal entity, the roadmap does not have a legal identity, so we don't know if it's possible if we do not have that legal status. But we will investigate it. By the end of June 2022, there are going to be regional commissions that have been invited to provide regional inputs. If we're ready, if we hope we can do this, or if you already know you can do it yourself, it would be great to share some of our messages with our regional offices if they can reach out to the regional commissions. In July 2022, there's going to be a high-level political forum. There's always one every year. And so that's also going to be one of the milestones for the 2023 conference. And another big event is in November 2022. We do not have much information yet about that one, but it's going to be in New York with an S. There's only one New York. So yeah, we'll, as we go along, we'll try to get more information about the UN water process, the UN 2023 water conference process, but that's what we know so far and where we're going to try to intervene as soon as possible. As I said, there was this online consultation in February 2022. I'm not going to read all of that. I've underlined in red all the themes that seem to correspond to what is in the roadmap, the initiatives of the roadmap. So there's technical training. There is something about giving priority to humanitarian issues arising from water scarcity, but it's very different from prioritizing humanitarian wash, because we're talking about all humanitarian issues that arise from water scarcity, specifically from a lack of water. So it's not mentioning really like humanitarian wash, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And there's a point about the finance, the lack of fundings for water. But clearly, there's in this consultation that none of the actors that were consulted raised the problems of humanitarian wash, really like the survival wash aspect, and the resilience aspect is only mentioned related to climate change, not to other kind of risks like conflicts or the one that we face in humanitarian settings. So that's about it for the UN conference. I don't know, we have a little bit of time, so I wanted to ask if anyone has information, questions about that UN conference process. Maybe some of us here in the audience have the response to your question. So I see some hand, so please feel free, anyone that has their hand up, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Elisa. I've got a comment and a question regarding this conference. First thing, the conference of New York is coming after the 1977 conference of Mar del Plata. It means that it's the second conference in 46 years, and it may not reappear for several decades. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. It's an important event, which is quite bizarre because everybody's expecting a low intensity event and very few decisions taken. So, second thing, as you said very clearly, it's a UN conference, it's the governments who are going to decide. The other one are going to observe. So basically, in terms of advocacy, our advocacy is to work with the governments. What shall we ask? We shall ask for a resolution, UN resolution. When I say we, it's our governments. So basically here, if we come back to the scale, the ladder of advocacy, we are looking for allies. And what shall we ask? We shall ask first a recurrence of a UN Water Conference. We don't want to have that every 46 years. And secondly, we should ask for, achieving, as you said, ensuring that humanitarian watch is part of the discussions. Maybe that the Blue Deal that was finalized in Dakar would be, So we need to find a document that we want to push, that we want our government to push, and we want to ask for a recurrence of this event. To ask for a resolution, we need to have government allies. Some governments are already trying to connect themselves. France is trying to connect with Indonesia. We may connect with Swiss. I try to approach Marc-André on that. Because I think what is super important is to first be sure that we've got this, this task force of governments who want to push for something. And then we need to very quickly identify what we want to push for. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Jean. Yeah, we'll get back at you on this with our last slides and what's next.
Well, we'll discuss it next week in the workshop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mario?
Yeah, just adding on to what's been stated and fully agree. But I think in line with those external factors that we see in conflict, in COVID pandemics, and especially climate change, that's the hold. I think it's especially that latter one on the climate change and linking that to the Nexus discussion, which I think we as a humanitarian sector will then be able to put ourselves in a more middle position. It's extremely surprising and concerning to hear that the humanitarian WASH sector as a whole is not being recognized. So yeah, just fully agree that this is our moment to really start to strategize on how we build ourselves forward. I also wonder informally, I mean, we do have our links with the Sanitation and Water for All, Katrina and that group. We do have, and I see here on the list, people like Emmett, Thomas Slaymaker from the SDGs. So, a lot of those informal discussions we need to start to pick up. I'm not trying to pick names here, but rather let's use those contacts that we have. And let's also be very realistic about where the sector is going to, in line with the Nexus and in line with the 3 Cs. And then I think we have a hold on as we move forward. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. That's already content for next week's workshop. So that looks like you are all motivated. So that's wonderful. I hope you can join. I see Leah's hand. Solène, up to you, Leah, maybe.
Sure. Just really quick, a couple thoughts. I think the point about climate change is a really, really good one. It seems everyone agrees on that. And that seems to be one of the issues that's been emerging a lot. And also SWA, I know that they're planning a public facing campaign leading up to the conference. So maybe that's something that we could try to influence as well. The only other thought that I had is that based on the limited knowledge of what I have about the high level meeting in 2023, it seems like youth engagement is going to be a really key component. So maybe if we can try to identify a youth champion who could speak to these issues, it would be a good way to get visibility at some of the plenary sessions and just in general with our public facing communications. Over.
Wonderful, thank you. Solène.
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks to all the guests for having shared with us their expertise on this topic of advocacy. I was actually wondering because I agree with what's been said about this event being very large and especially being organized for government representatives. So I'm wondering, on top of alliances with governments and other actors to push for resolution, votes, and changes, What about side events? I believe that every large and international event, such as this one, they offer side events, which allow for discussions with new and emerging actors, even advocacy, and to directly talk with government representatives. And that's all outside of the plenary session. So I think it's quite, interesting and legitimate, I think. Would the Rush Roadmap initiative be able to organize such a side event and participate this way, or is it out of the question?
Yeah, I think, Solène, you're right. There are side events. I think we'll discuss those tactics as well, like during the workshop next week. So maybe I should conclude the slides on that, and maybe next week we can definitely see where we can put. The only thing I would be careful about is that the amount of resources that we have and where our strength will be and where we can spend our energy resources on. So we'll discuss all that probably at the workshop or throughout when we're building the strategy. Let me just, I don't know if I'm still sharing my screen. Yes, I just wanted to conclude with what's going to be next. And indeed, you all said we need to discuss further about what is the content of our strategy. So we want to propose, we already sent you the invitation, hopefully you received it, next week on June 7th. We're gonna have a workshop, and our idea for the moment is just to focus on, the time is of the essence. Like, we really do not have that much time to build messages for that event. And the idea is that we honestly always failed to build collective advocacy. And so we propose to follow the recommendation of the Global Health Vision, is to base our advocacy on what gathers us today, which is the roadmap. So focusing on the roadmap, humanitarian coordination, and toward the UN 2023 Water Conference is something we seem to all agree on. So we wanted to start with that. That way we are not spending too much time, and none of you have a lot of time to spend on the workshop. That workshop is going to be only 1 hour and 30 minutes, which is super short to build a strategy. And so the objective is just trying to see if we could be happy shaping something around the roadmap initiatives and the priorities that have already been defined. Maybe add a few elements that we seem to all agree on in terms of the narrative, which could be climate change, acceleration of crisis. All of this can be part of the narrative, obviously, but in terms of what we really want to demand and our advocacy asks, is that what we want to define in that workshop on June 7th. And ultimately what that workshop is going to lead to is that the Secretariat and 4.3 leads are going to sit and try to draft an advocacy strategy that will be presented, refined, maybe hopefully validated at the next steering committee in July 2022. And so what we'll share with you is a draft call to actions that we want to target the delegations that will be at the 23 Water Conference. So the countries, as Jean said, these are the ones that are the decision maker. It's a very global campaign at that point. We're not into the nitty-gritty of what every country can do, but maybe we can try to reach that. So all the details of our proposal is in this link. We invite you to go to it before the workshop, make as many comments as you wish. The only thing that we're trying to do is let's have all the initiatives try to be represented kind of in an equal foot and not put one in front of the other. It's really like the objective is that it's a collective things and that everyone can be represented. So feel free to go in there. The idea is also it's like about survival WASH, but it's also about building resilience, resilient WASH services, because what we want to do is, as the Global Health Vision report says, we also want to attract new actors in our advocacy, in our objectives. We do not want, like the French government is the perfect example of the Agence Française de Développement, who is doing development, says we do not do humanitarian WASH. What we want is to attract those guys. We want the development banks to come and realize that together we can build something that is not just humanitarian WASH, it's resilient WASH services. So that's kind of the idea of the call to action. It is not set in stone. It's for sure just a start to give you ideas, to get you started. It can completely change if needed, if everyone agrees. And so what we've done is we took an Excel sheet of all the initiatives and tried to get specific advocacy asks that can be related to each initiative. That's the second link. And we've tried to put some together. As you know, some of the initiatives kind of stick together naturally, and it's shifting and evolving already. So we've done that too. And we've come up with a few recommendations and narratives that is just to get you started and to be discussed on June 7th. That's it. I talked a lot. I see Mariel, you have your hands up.
Yeah, just one more point, just taking on what you've just mentioned, the important role of those donors. And we already know now the key donors that are supporting the roadmap and the work that we're doing with the BHA, the SDC, the ECHO, and the new form of the DFID. That in alignment with this whole other aspect, which I didn't mention before, but I really think it's worth it for us to think about it as a group, is this whole aspect of integrated WASH. We know also that the sector is moving around integrated WASH, linking onto that nexus. So that's another point that we should be really getting our energy from, linking up with those donors who are focusing very much on the nexus, and that's very explicit in, for example, the BHA USAID programs, not all of them, but in a number of them, and for a few of these other donors that that we work with. So just some further food for thought for the group. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Guillaume?
Thanks, and yeah, I think a bit to reiterate what Mariel just said. I think we should build that alliance and build on what is existing. We don't have to start from scratch. There are already things that I believe we agree with that are part of the Dakar Declaration and other documents, and on which we should try to focus, because it will give us more outreach. We'll start talking about things that people have already heard, and so that's an approach I would recommend, and I will try to think about before the workshop next week.
Wonderful. Francois?
Yes, thank you. Now you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, just in the previous slide you were mentioning you were maybe expecting some private sector associations to partner and to be observers. Do you have any? I guess
it is possible. Yeah.
No, but you have already names. I get le partenariat français de l'eau is the private sector voice. Is it? Not
no,
really. Okay.
nothing set.
Do you have any kind of names in line already for this?
No, I think that's going to be discussed as well in the workshop next week, as that's part of the allies of the strategy, I think, probably.
Okay. So it's still to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about it and let us know next week.
Elisa?
Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think a little out of the box. We've been waiting for this event for 50 years, nearly 50 years. I was 8 years old. So I think if we want to put too many eggs in the same basket, it will never work. I mean, we all want to have humanitarian WASH. We all want to act on climate crisis, etc. But for me, what is our priority? Our priority is to create a regular, recurrent UN dialogue on water. This doesn't exist. Water is not presented at the UN General Assembly in September. UN never speak. Governments never speak about water. So I'm thinking a strategy that could be easier and maybe more impacting would be to come to the conference of 2023 with one ask. Only creating one resolution, one ask, creating a recurrent UN water conference every year. That's it. We don't speak about humanitarian, we don't speak about climate, because all this is going to dilute our message. Priority, we ask for a recurrent conference. And then we'll see. I mean, maybe in 2024 or 2025, we'll try to push the humanitarian agenda. But at least let's be sure that the UN can meet governments every year on water. It doesn't exist. So for me, I would be more humble, you know, and try to see ourselves in 10 years. And then in this case, let's first set the basics. Thank you.
We can put it as a proposal for the workshop. So the difficulty of next week's workshop is definitely to save in 1 hour and 30 minutes as much time to define something collective. So our challenge till next week is to find a process that gives everyone a voice, but at the same time where everyone can vote and discuss things and prioritize issues, basically. So we're probably going to go with a survey of who's voting for what in terms of priorities. I'm just thinking out loud, but yeah, Jean, we'll put it as an option. But please, all the comments, I'm going to try to look at them before the end of the call, but save them, go directly. We'll send you an email just after this call with the links to the documents. If you don't have the time to just go to those documents, just send us an email with your ideas and we'll try to brainstorm before the event so we maximize the time we have next week. I don't see any other question. Bram, Florent, Leah, I don't know if you have anything else to say or if you want to close the meeting and just invite everyone to go on the document and share online their comment.
I mean, we're all struggling for time. Please, next week, Tuesday, same time, come to the workshop, okay? We'll have 1 hour and a half. I like Jean's idea, but I'm also thinking if we were to organize like a side event, what's the content of that? Yes, I mean, what do we want to bring? If we have the opportunity to work with sanitation, water for all, to work with water aid, they will be there, they will be doing things. If we can collaborate on stuff, what's going to be our message? What's going to be our angle? So I like the idea, but if you want to discuss this and other things, come next week. Please, and spread the word to the colleagues. We need more people. We need more people than we have today. Please invite your co-leads, invite your members and your initiatives. We need to be there. As Jean said, this is a crucial conference.
And because it is crucial, my apologies for interrupting, but really try to get those heavyweights. You know, the ones that are not on this call, but they were asked to be on this call. They should really try to be on the next call. Thanks.
Help us get them.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's where these informal contacts. So maybe Jean, you know, Tom, or you know, Guillaume, you know, Omar. Yeah, I mean, we can all send a quick message. I mean, it's a small little community we're in. It's just a reminder. It's an important meeting. Try to be here, please.
Wonderful. I shared in the text box already the links to the documents. It's not really pretty, but it's there. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next week.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.